All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting daily vlog. It's daily vlog number, I think it's 231 now. So, today, I had a rather productive conversation with a friend of mine, and we're basically talking about they run a D&D program for the school that they work at, and they were trying to find ways to deal with things like problem players, things like learning how to challenge the players effectively, and just running a program like that. And we got to talking about where are places that you can get advice, specifically advice that you can listen to as opposed to having to sit down and read. And I kind of so I consider myself a tabletop RPG YouTuber. And I'm somewhat familiar with a lot of the bigger names in the D&D slash tabletop RPG YouTube space. And something that I've found is, for the most part, if you're looking for advice on D&D or tabletop RPGs in general, there's basically two main things that you will find on D&D YouTube or TTRPG YouTube. The first one, which tends to be really significantly more common, at least as far as what I have seen on my For You page and things like that, is stuff that is very player focused, but it's mainly builds and things like that that are designed to quote unquote break the game. I have very large problems with that because the vast majority of them don't actually work, and they require you either to just not understand how rules work, or for your DM to interpret one specific rule in a very, very specific way. And if they don't, then the entire build is bogus. The other thing that you tend to see on YouTube and podcasts and stuff as far as advice around D&D and not just like product reviews and stuff like that, is very much focused on either dealing with problem players, or I guess like they do have DM advice, but it tends to be kind of geared towards brand new DMs, which is great. I think it's very, very useful to have stuff for people that have never did a DM before. But you tend to see the same advice over and over and over again. And a lot of it tends to deal with, well, how do you deal with problem players or problem player style situations? Like, how do you keep your players from metagaming, or, stuff like that. And as far as tips and techniques that you can use for established DMs or GMs to just make your stuff better, there just really isn't a ton of it out there, with a few kind of rare exceptions, or at least not that I have seen. Again, it's possible that there's many channels that focus on this, but a lot of times, like I said, I've watched a lot of it, and the DM advice that I see most often is, I have this problem at my table, how do I fix it? Not so much, these are some tools that you can use to make your games more interesting or anything like that. And that probably has to do a lot with the fact that a lot of stuff like that is sold on sites like the DM's Guild. Like there's things on encounter building and stuff like that on there, and monster stat blocks and puzzles that you can use. And people want to make money off it because it's hard to do, and I have no problem with that. But I had a really hard time recommending to my friends something that they could listen to in order to just kind of improve their DMing and get new ideas on things that they can do to create more interesting D&D sessions. And it's a bit frustrating. And I know, like, I talk about it on here a fairly regular basis. But it's intermixed with, videos about how much I don't like my mental illnesses, and videos about random other things that just were interesting to me on that particular day. So it's not a really, like, I don't really have a place that I can go, oh, just listen to all these and they'll be great. So yeah, I think, and again, it's possible that I am just not seeing it. So for those of you that are a little bit more familiar with the TTRPG space, or as YouTube calls it, the D&D space on YouTube, if there is channels that either have like series that are particularly focused on helping established DMs kind of get better, and give them ideas about, other stuff that they can do, put names and links and stuff in the comments. Exclusively YouTube. Do not link off of the site, because I will delete any links that do not link to YouTube, just to avoid people doing bad things with links. Or just, mention the channel name if it's something like, if it's Dungeon Dudes or something like that. Let me know. But yeah, I just found it interesting. One of the things we did talk about is the idea that a lot of the DMs just completely ignore the tools that already exist. Like a couple of the recommendations that I gave to my friend were things like in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, there's an entire section specifically geared toward DMs, and two of the things that I love the most in there, the puzzles in there are super awesome. I love them. They're interesting, they're fun, and they're generic enough that you could insert them into a lot of different places in a campaign. But the other one that most DMs just completely ignore is there is a... I can't remember what it's called. Well, here, I've got the damn thing. Let's just open up the damn book and look at it. Sources, Tasha's, natural hazards. I love this part of the book specifically because it gives you ideas on how you can create interesting skills-based encounters for your players that aren't, oh, make a dexterity save. Oh, you made it? You only take half damage. Yay! Like, that can work in a lot of different situations, but you want something more interesting, more complex. And so the natural hazards that they list specifically here, they talk about avalanches, talk about falling into water, falling into creatures, and then they have an entire section called Spell Equivalents of Natural Hazards. And so effectively, if you want to kind of challenge your players with like a flood, but you don't know mechanically what you want to do, well, either control water or tsunami, if you just use the effects of that spell without using the actual spell itself, like it's not that a wizard is casting tsunami, but if you use the effects of tsunami, it can actually simulate a lot of the problems that they would have to deal with dealing with a flood. Combine that with a few different skills checks and other things like that, and you have a significantly more interesting encounter than, oh, it's time to roll a Constitution save to make sure you're not too cold. So many dungeon masters and game masters in general will kind of hyperfixate on the idea that if you make them roll, then you are somehow challenging them, and it's simply not. That's a random thing that can be slightly controlled based on how your characters is built and where you've put your points and your training and stuff like that, depending on the RPPG. But it's still just leaving it up to chance. But having situations where you can use multiple different checks and different checks will do different things for you, and making a single good check or a single bad check doesn't solve the problem, but having multi-part problems creates significantly more interesting encounters for your players. In addition to Tasha's, another one that DMs seem to just forget exists in Xanathar's Guide to Everything. Xanathar's Guide to Everything is very much a player-centric book. It has a bunch of player options in it, and so most people think, when they think about it, they think mostly of, oh, that's where Forge Domain comes for clerics, or that's where the Arcane Archer for the fighter comes from, you know? But there's a section called Traps Revisited, and it is absolutely brilliant. They talk about the simple trap, which is the one that the vast majority of the dungeon masters, that's the only kind of trap that they're familiar with. It's basically you're walking through an area, player steps on the wrong place, the trap is sprung, and then they have to deal with it. Or they make a perception check, they detect a pressure plate, and they make a single thieves' tools check, and now they don't have to deal with that. That is the majority of traps that most DMs think about, is just a single thing that when you step on it, bad stuff happens. And there are a lot of uses for things like that make them very interesting. However, roll or scroll down a little bit, turn the page, whatever you wanted to do. They have an entire thing where they have examples of different traps, and then a guide on how to design simple traps. And then they have a section called complex traps. And a complex trap is not just, oh, there's a thing that when you step on it, bad things happen. A complex trap, like one of their examples, is called Path of Blades. And it's basically an entire hallway where there are all these different things going on. There are whirling blades and crushing pillars and a rune of fear and all of these other things. And then as you go through it, there are dynamic aspects that make things change as the players go through it. That is a really interesting situation for players to deal with. Because instead of, I check for traps. Did I find them? Cool. I disarm the traps. Yay, we don't have to do anything anymore. This is not something that you can just make a single check and, oh, everything is done. This is multiple checks. This is using the abilities that your class gives you, that feats give you, in interesting ways. This is coming up with unique ways to get certain characters through that are just not built for challenges like this. That is an interesting, fun thing. And again, in addition to having example complex traps in there, they also have an entire guide on how to design them so you can make your own. So they give you examples of, hey, this is what it might look like. But then they also go, okay, now we're going to break it down and we're going to teach you how to make your own so that you can have cool stuff going on in your game. This is in the first like really big rules expansion that was launched for D&D 5th edition. And most DMs have never heard of complex traps, have no idea what they do, and it's right there. Everything, all the really hard work has been done for you by the people that made the game. But DMs don't use it because, well, I get sections like that are just for beginner DMs, and I'm an established DM, so I have no reason to do that. Another one that drives me nuts: the DMG, Dungeon Master's Guide. Most dungeon masters I know use the DMG simply as a magic item lookup book. That's the only thing that they use it for. But there's a lot of useful stuff in there. Things like the Chapter 5 adventuring environments. They have all of this different stuff. Things like urban encounter suggestions, which is literally, it's not just, oh, here's some, here's some monsters you might find in a city. No, this is things like they talk about trials and sentences that you might have to deal with. They have a random urban encounter list that has a lot more than just, okay, here's a bunch of monsters. Like, one of the urban encounters they have is called Announcement. A herald, a town crier, a prophet, or another individual makes an announcement on a street corner for all to hear. The announcement might foreshadow some oncoming event, such as a public execution, communicate important information to the general masses, such as a new royal decree, or convey a dire omen or warning. That's not, oh, here's some monsters to throw at your players. That's an actual situation that your players can react to. And the interesting thing about something as simple as an announcement is because this is a game, your players are going to assume if you make an announcement that it somehow has to be really important. And it can be. You can use something like that to kind of guide your players to the next plot hook that you want to drop in front of them. Or it can just be a random occurrence that did happen in cities. They had town criers often in large cities. Like, that was a job. That's what you did. Even when you get into more modern times. The newsies and things like that used to, run around as kind of modern town criers, and they'd have their newspapers, and they'd just be yelling about the different headlines that were in the newspapers to get people's attention. If you go to somewhere like New York City now, there's still people that are standing on soapboxes and things like that, talking about things that are important to them, that they feel that the rest of the people around them need to be aware of. So it's not like this is something that doesn't happen in real life. This is a real thing. And it can be something as simple as, hey, someone's getting executed tomorrow. Make sure to show up early or you won't be able to watch the head hit the ground. Or it could be a hook to your next, big story arc that you're making. And if you use them in the correct way, your players won't know which it is. And then they get to decide, based on their character's motivations, does my character care about this? Or do I want to look somewhere else? And again, there's 20 different encounters that they list here for urban encounters. And that is one thing in the Dungeon Master's Guide. Again, there are so many things that exist that most DMs just completely throw away because, like, well, I'm an established DM, so I don't need to read this book because that's designed for baby DMs. And the fun part about it is a lot of times baby DMs, because they don't know what they're doing yet, don't know how useful something like this can be. And they just see another table that they can roll on, and they're like, oh, well, I don't know if I wanted to do that or something else, or, yeah, so, yeah. So anyway, I'd love to do an entire series where I just kind of give advice to established DMs, to take them from I know what I'm doing to I feel that I have mastered these skills and I feel very comfortable just kind of stepping into the DM chair whenever it's available. Because there is a large gap between I know how to DM, and I am confident enough in my DMing abilities that I can just kind of sit down and go for it whenever there's an opportunity that I want to take. I know a lot of dungeon masters that feel very unprepared constantly, no matter how long they've been running it. So yeah, I'd love to run a series like that. However, I already have a series that I've been neglecting that I'm getting back to, I promise. And with my mental health and my disabilities and everything, I just can't afford to do that. So for right now, you're going to just have to watch, my daily vlogs, or at least look at the titles, because when I talk about D&D and DMing type stuff, I generally tend to put some kind of hint in the title. So, yeah. Interested to hear from you guys, though. First of all, again, are there D&D YouTubers that are giving out advice that is geared towards DMs, that is not, this is how you deal with problem players, or this is how you become a dungeon master? Let me know in the comments down below. And then for anyone that is either an established DM or GM or just starting out, is there a piece of advice that you were given or you heard, or maybe that you gave to someone else, that was just instrumental in, something about being a game master just clicking for you, and you've kind of clung to that particular bit of advice over and over again? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that is all for me today. I will see you guys in the next time. All right? Bye-bye.